talk about, or what I'm going to talk about, because I do go off piece a bit. And just to remind you, I'm more of an artist than a speaker. So that's a piece of work that I did recently. It was a prototype of the piece I'm going to talk about. So the way I'm going to structure this course, this talk, it's only 15 minutes. It's basically to give you a bit of background of where I'm coming from, because I like to know where artists are coming from, and then to talk more about how and why I utilise technologies in my work. Just the background image here is an old IBM 3090, which are the old machines I used to work on. Okay, so my background. Right. So my background is nearly 30 years working in the IT industry. So I was a programmer, I did analysis of systems design, and later on consultancy. My first computer was a Commodore 64, and at school in the 80s we were the first years to do O&A level computer science, so it was all quite new. I mean, there was only one computer in the school. So when I left school and had to earn money, I applied for 3 jobs: a trainee pilot, research on an oil rig, and a trainee analyst programmer, and I got the latter job. So that's the reason why I ended up in IT. I've always hated working in the tech industry.
Sorry, could you talk a bit more into the mic?
Yeah, is that different?
Yeah, you can swing it round if you like.
No, that's a bit technical.
To where you want to be. Thank you.
Right, is that better? Yes. Yeah, it's just to say that I've always disliked working in the tech industry, which I'll go on to explain later. So I've always tried to escape. First escape was I did a fine art degree at Goldsmiths, but then couldn't work out how to earn money out of that, so I went back to programming. The second escape, I tried to be a cabinet maker. I couldn't work out how to make money, so I went back to programming. And my partner's also an artist, and we thought, oh, fuck this, we're sort of late 40s, we just don't become full-time artists now, we're never going to do it, so we sold the house. And now we've been doing it full-time for 4 years and really enjoying it. Obviously not thinking about pensions or things like that. Background image, I don't know why I like my background image. These are coding forms. When I first started coding, we used to have to write the code in pencil on these forms and give them to data punch girls to type in. I've never worked out why. I think because programmers were mainly male, they thought it was too intellectual to type. So there's a bit of history there. And also COBOL was actually led by Grace Hopper, who was a sort of pioneer in developing computer languages, and it's still in use today, the language. Okay. The next I'm going to talk about how this experience of working in IT has actually fed into my work. Okay, so apart from the obvious skill sets of sort of programming, you can't see those percentages. I'm just saying it's quite a hostile environment to work in as a woman. I'd like to quote from my experiences, but I actually did a bit of Googling to see what other people's experiences were and just came up with these figures. So women in technology earn less than men, with men earning up to 61% or more than women. And believe me, when I had access to all the data, I was running sort of programs on the sort of pay data, and it was more than this often. And the second statistic, 64%, is the majority of queer employees that said bullying contributes to their decision to leave the IT industry. And a quote from The Guardian recently said sexism, racism and bullying are driving people out of tech. I mean, there's endless stories, but I think you've got a better understanding of where I'm coming from. In terms of technology, it skilled me with technical skills, but it also politicised me. Okay, so the approach to my work. I'd say the approach to my work is conceptual-ish, which means it's sort of led by ideas. Because I can work with wood, it doesn't mean I realise my project in wood. Because I'm technical, it doesn't mean I have to employ technologies to do my work. I have recurring sort of 3 themes and concerns that run through my work, like queer, feminist, and misinformation, especially in terms of gender violence against women. So I work with those ideas, and I don't want to limit or compromise the way the work comes out. So the image here, the father of conceptualism, sort of Marcel Duchamp, he did the urinal. And I've actually shown a piece of work by Elsa von Freytag Loringhoven. It was actually her piece of work. So not only did he steal the idea, he stole her work. And that sort of cemented his career. So, and no one can really be asked to change the art canons. I think it would just be a bit more difficult. But I think that's another piece of misinformation that's still being taught to art students. Okay, this is my last sculpture. So this is the artwork I'm going to talk about. How did I get the idea and how I actually made it. It's a piece of work called This Much I'm Worth, and it's a self-evaluating artwork which displays its value in sterling continually. So to physically describe it, it's about 4 metres long and about 2 metres high. It weighs about half a tonne. It's consisted from over 80 pieces of neon, recycled server room equipment and cables, electronics, IP cameras. I was running off a Windows 7 server, just lots of stuff basically. And to explain the functional conceptual makeup, it's a continued displays its sale value. So really it's about questioning how values are apportioned, how values are placed on people, and looking at things like algorithmic bias. The values set by a series of complex algorithms, which I call the endorsers, like in the art world, that run nightly and they calculate the value and post the value to the Internet of Things. So the endorsers, how they work is they data mine social media, they data scrape sites, and they make judgments and evaluations based on gender, race, sexuality, and amongst other things, and they also have some influence from the financial markets. So all this artwork does is actually retrieve it and displays it, but in the gallery it does certain things where it fluctuates a bit of percent to give some people sort of entertainment, because people like to be entertained. So the IP cameras will watch the people. If no one's actually interacting it, the price will just deteriorate a bit. If people are watching it, it will increase. Also, if you tweet about it, then it's sort of increasing its provenance and awareness, so it will increase. Okay, and just to say, the endorsers, they're not open source. And the artwork, it was entirely made by myself, apart from the neon blowing that was done by a brilliant neon blower called Julie Bickerstaff. So it was basically just made by women over 50, so I call it my menopausal masterpiece. Okay, so really we're going to go from the start of the concept. My partner had some work in the Royal Academy, so I went to see the Royal Academy show. And there was an artist called Alan Charlton. I do actually like his work, but basically he does grey triangles. And I was just quite amazed the price was £60,000. It sort of hit me, and I know there's a huge disparity between men and women's work and what it sells for. So I decided to come back and look at the site. So I ran some algorithms to data scrape the RA catalogue, just to actually look at the differences between men and women's work. Meanwhile, in the studio, I decided to do a replica of his triangle. And then I used an old Indian technique of bending wood, which is called kerfing, and pulled the top. Because he describes his work as pure, simple, silent, honest and absolute, and basically by sort of querying it or pulling the top, I was just saying, like, fuck it, life isn't like that. So then I became quite intrigued about continuing this data scraping work and looking at stats. So I thought, well, it'd be great to have an artwork that actually evaluates its own value. So I built this prototype. It's built from neon and Nixie lights, and it has a black box with all the electronics. And the choice of the materials, neon is really to sort of give a nod to the sort of sex industry where values are placed on women and women are traded. The Nixie lights, these were the calculating lights used in the old calculators and voltmeters. And then the black box contained all the electronics like a PCB board for controlling the Nixie lights, Arduino and Wi-Fi and stuff like that. And just hopping quickly, that's actually a Nixie light. I don't know if you remember the old machines. So they're sort of, it's a cold cathode tube with sort of layered figures. And basically going back to this work won the Aesthetica Prize, which gave me £5,000, which means I could actually go on and do a more ambitious project. Because all my work is sort of self-funded through working. So, I wanted to go big, and I wanted to sort of play to the desire of spectacle and sort of work that shouts and plays into the machismo of the art world. I also like a challenge, and I also wanted to see how this would affect the price. I mean, I had no idea what I'm doing. So the first thing I did was I used Rhino as a CAD package, and I taught myself through that through furniture making. So I started mocking up pieces. I wanted to keep with a neon theme, and I wanted to keep with a Nixie lights theme, but they don't make Nixie lights that big, so I thought, well, to do a neon rendition of the Nixie light would be quite interesting. So these were sort of initial sketches, and then I thought, I think because it's such a commitment, it was hard to actually do it, if you know what I mean. I kept going, ooh. So the next thing I did in CAD also is then I started modelling. I thought I have to do a prototype of at least one Nixie light to see how it appeared, and I wanted the aesthetic to look very sort of Heath Robinson, constructed well, but it could have been constructed in the back shed. And because I couldn't actually blow the neon, I had to be quite concise because I was going to make the cages in the studio. I mean, just a diversion, interesting about the internet is it's so empowering. You can teach everything yourself. Like I taught myself the welding, CAD, the whole lot. You don't have to go and ask people anymore, and it's all free. And then the next stage was I used V-Ray, which sort of renders Rhino files to make them look more realistic, to actually see that the digit stacking was actually working, because obviously at this point I was going to have to part with some money. So it had to work first time because I didn't have the money to go and get them remade. So that is how it works really. That's a real prototype. But from Rhino, what's also great is you can produce these plans, which are sort of one-to-one scale plans, and I could give them to the sort of lady neon maker. So I could be very precise. I mean, she's amazing. And yeah, they came back absolutely spot on. Okay, and the next point was, how do I animate neon? I had no idea how to animate neon. And I contacted a company in the US who were really excited about the project, and they said, tell us more, we can do this for you, we've done all these shows. So I sent them all my details saying about my queer feminist concerns and where I was coming from, and I got a letter back saying, don't contact us again, we never want to work with you. And that's why I thought, fuck that, I don't want to work with people like that. So I decided I just wanted to work with women on the project. I'm not saying this problem is just to do with men, but in this case. And also just as an experiment to see how disempowered we are, how difficult it was to find people with the experience. So because I didn't have any language as well, I mean what I needed to animate, I put a call out to WES, which is the Women's Engineering Society, over 10,000 people, and didn't really get any response. Then I went on the electrical forums. So I've just realised you're a qualified electrician now. I just met Shelley, one of the speakers, and put a call out to women electricians, and I got a lot of responses like, oh, I'll come and do it in high heels, why do you want why do you want women, I can do it, and lots of this is deleted, comment deleted. So I thought, oh, this is going to case another fuck back, sorry, no language. I'll do it myself. And I remember the times I used to write these programs that looped infinitely, which was my speciality, and the only way to do it, to actually rectify that, was to reboot the computers remotely with PDUs, which are power distribution units. If you think of them, they're just like plug boards, but you can control them through, they've got network cards in. So basically it just switches on and off one socket. So I found loads of these on eBay. In fact, I mean, half the time during this project I was on eBay looking for recycled server room equipment, because I think there's a rule now, they can't actually dump this stuff, and they've got to get rid of it. So if you go on Gumtree and eBay, you just find it for next to nothing. And it works out cheaper than buying the electrical components and actually putting them all together. So this is the PDU, and I controlled it via, I can never say this, SNMP commands. So just for the more technical ones, if you want to see what an SNMP command looks like, it looks like that. Just Google it. I mean, I just Google everything. Right. Also, the advantage of working with CAD is you can print out one-to-one scale plans like workshop jigs, which is great because I'm dyslexic and I always get my numbers back to front. So, I measure something 31, I'll sort of cut it at 13. But this sort of prevents this because you can actually just measure against the workshop piece. So this is when I built all the cages for the neon. Again, I taught myself welding on YouTube. It's very simple actually. It's just like using a glue gun, and then with a flat dish you can just hide all the rubbish. And then I acquired these from Gumtree. People were getting rid of server room equipment, so I was actually just cutting them up and assembling it. And at this point the work was getting quite heavy for me to move around, so I had to build it in a modular way because I knew I'd be transporting it and it was only me moving it around. And then I always make things difficult for myself, so I wanted to hang the piece. I mean, hanging half a ton is a bit of a challenge. They held up. I don't know how. But that was the first time I nearly came to tears, because this hanging unit, because I wanted it to look like a hanging altar, sort of like a picture. But when I tried to get out of my studio to the spray booth, and it wouldn't fit out the studio door, and I had to get an axle grinder and cut it in half. And then I had to have a good talking to myself to get a grip. Okay, this is my studio. I'm very lucky to have a big studio at the moment. So this is me. This is like Meccano at this point. And because I've never made anything from CAD, it's amazing, it all works. Everything just fitted together. And it took a day to assemble after sort of, probably nearly a year of sort of going through the plans and building. I still can't believe I did that. And that's the best, when all the glass and everything came together. I actually prefer it off. It looks wonderful. But I think the way to do it is really not to think of the project as a whole, otherwise I never would have done it. Just to think of it as modular bits. Right, I'm going to build a cage, I'm then going to look at the animation, I'm then going to look at this, because, yes. Right, and this is it in the gallery when it's lit. And everything worked beautifully, I was really surprised. Right, and this is the piece actually looking at the people in the gallery. Because the IP cameras are collecting the audience data and sending it back to the Internet of Things that the endorsers may or may not be looking at to evaluate. I'm also interested in how people engage with artwork. I think it's quite important to engage people with the work. So sort of I've got all that information to process, I think, in my next piece. Right, space. I was just going to touch on it because it's why do artists use technology? And I think it's to do with sometimes they just don't have space. I mean, I've had times where I've not had a studio. So it's a lot easier to create something on the computer. And I'm just going to run through a little project that I did when I didn't have a studio. It was called Stamps of Disapproval. And what I was trying to do is teach people or activists to publicly data mine police data. So we were looking at the data they had on domestic violence. And I was encouraging people to mark the spot with a stamp. Because what happens is you hear a stat and it doesn't mean anything, but I think when you physicalise the data, when you see it, it does. And then that was a little graffiti bag. So basically you cut the sign in the bottom of a sort of little bag. And then you can covertly sort of spray it on the street. This is interesting because I actually got the idea from, there's an exhibition here that's brilliant called Disobedient Objects. And this comes from a clandestine Syrian stencil. And they actually spray this to mark scenes, I think, when people died. And it's to share, so I think that's great. Okay, so there's me with my beard hat. Spraying the street. And what was interesting, where I was doing this in Plymouth, there was one site, I couldn't believe it, there were 700 reported incidents on one spot in that year of violence. Now, it doesn't mean anything, but when you see it, it's like, oh my God. Anyway, that was incredible. So that's kind of it, because we only have 15 minutes. But yeah, just to say as well, I was very lucky, and I'll actually be artist in residence here from October, dealing with data, which is cool. And that's it.